Okay, so we're recording now. So I'll start the question over. Aditi, I get the sense that this experience really did shift things for you in your life. And I know that you had attended countless deaths before, but it does seem like there was something different about this experience, which really led your unfolding story into different directions. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to that and catch us all up with what's going on.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I had been working in a 26-bed inpatient hospice facility here in Asheville, and it was sort of my dream job in the allopathic medical world. And I think when I think about the timing of my meeting Ethan, it was really in the midst of COVID, and I had witnessed so many COVID deaths, and just the whole experience of being a physician during that time, or all providers I think would agree, there was just such a like a loss of that human connection that we all valued and do value. And so I think that the contrast of having this Ethan experience from the COVID deaths I had been a part of for 2 years almost, I think that was part of how part of why it rocked my world, really. I got involved with Ethan about just 2 weeks before he died. So really a few days before he came to Asheville. And I connected with him through our friend Jojo, who had been following his live streams. And he put out a call to me as the hospice doc and community organizer here in Asheville, and Scott, the director of films, and just said, hey, there's this brother that needs our help. And so for me, I didn't know it would be what it would be until the Friday that he arrived at the inpatient facility, because we got him from a hospice in Charlotte to 2 hours from here to our hospice. And it was just like almost like a typical transfer of a person who was an amazing person. But there was something about the hospice that I had devoted so much of my life to, denying his request to film. I think that was the moment I had a big shift. Our hospice had been a small nonprofit when I started, became a larger nonprofit bought by a big hospital system, and then was purchased by a for-profit, all during COVID. And so I think for me, I was just feeling the disconnect from this natural, sacred experience, and meeting Ethan and quickly realizing he couldn't have his dying wish met in the facility. I had a choice to make, and it was sort of, I really didn't have a choice. At that moment, I just sort of surrendered to this strong energy that was coming through, this deep knowing, and somehow fear dissipated, and I just knew what to do next. And so that surrender has really stayed with me to this day. And what happened was, during those 2 weeks, I was really clear that so many people that were showing up for Ethan were jazzed. They were just coming up to me and saying, can we do this for other people? Like there was something so potent and magical about that shared purpose, and bringing ritual and ceremony to that experience. And who he was also so touching. So as he was taking his last breath, I was in the other room, and I just had this deep knowing I was meant to leave my job, which is not like me at all. And many of you can probably relate. I was very linear in my thinking. Just to get through medical training, you have to be pretty linear. And that all shifted for me. So it really has impacted my life in more ways than one. But that's a short answer.
Do you want to say a little bit about what it led you to what you're building now?
Yeah, so I put my notice in maybe a few days after I went back to work, after he died, not having a plan, but knowing that I was committed to exploring alternative ways to support those who were dying. And at that point, the vision of an alternative to aging care as well was a part of my vision. But and I had been holding this vision for probably 10 years, that something was missing in our modern approach to death. And so I put my notice in, and then I just sort of followed the breadcrumbs. And what it has led to is the emergence of the Center for Conscious Living and Dying, which is a traditional nonprofit, but really focused on community-supported end-of-life care and education. And what we're finding is in order to really learn the skills and be present with people who are dying, there's a lot of inner work and cultivation and contemplation that has to happen. So much of our time is dedicated to the volunteers and caregivers showing up to be with those dying, as well as direct care for up to 3 people in a home residential setting. So we provide the gaps that hospice care doesn't. Hospice comes in and offers the medical care, nursing care once a week, CNA care support 2 times a week, and we offer that 24/7 family style care in a residence, and offer a ritual and ceremony. So,
Thank you.
mhm.
Scott, I'm curious. This was such an incredibly intimate experience. I think that Ethan was really asking for, and that you all really helped create. And we never get to see you, and you were there for every step of it. Or we don't get to see your camera either. This big piece of technology. And I'm just wondering what the experience was like for you, being in such an intimate, sacred place, and while at the same time doing this work that you were doing.
I had a profound fear of death before making this movie. It crippled me pretty much, paralyzed me my entire life. And this would never be a film I'd want to make if it weren't for Aditi. And so, she mentioned earlier that she's had this vision for 10 years. It's true, because I met Aditi like 10 years ago, and she told me that sometimes she plays harmonium when people are transitioning. And I thought to myself, if someone makes a film about her, that would be the most beautiful shot imaginable. So when I got an email that some, conscious dying dude was, going viral on social media, I pretty much ignored the email completely because I was like, oh, that's not something I want to do. And then I heard that Aditi was going to be his care provider, and that they just insisted I speak to Ethan. And I spoke to Ethan, and he said, will you film my dying days? And I almost like collapsed to the ground. I was at a bird sanctuary, and I just knew, just like Aditi had this knowing and this vision all along, that the opportunity to be with Ethan and to be with Aditi was something that I had to drop everything and commit to. There was just no alternative. As Brent says in the film, say yes to the stranger. And so, like, I was on a flight pretty much 72 hours later on a red eye, and I just showed up and I followed Aditi's lead. I learned how to be at the bedside. And that, when you ask this question about the camera, it was more a practice of understanding how to be vulnerable and intimate, and to explore the gift of this space of being with the dying.
Thank you. Um, I have a whole list of questions that I'd like to ask both of you, and I'm also aware that we don't have a ton of time. We said we were going to end at 9 o'clock Eastern time, and I want to hold to that, to respect everyone's schedule. So there are a lot of people here, and I'm assuming there may be questions that people have. So maybe we can turn it over to questions from people who are here in attendance. And to do that, you just have to do the emoji where you click your hand. The hand raise emoji, and then it'll put you right in a queue, and then I'll call on you, and then you have to unmute yourself. Okay, so in the meantime, as we wait for people to step in, Aditi, I'm curious if there was anything that came out during that time with Ethan that you didn't see coming, that surprised you in any way.
It's a great question. I think the film does a beautiful job of capturing the most precious moments, and weaving his precious life into the journey of his death and dying. What it doesn't capture is the turmoil and the chaos that often accompanies the dying process for people. So we gathered as a team, and we're all on the fly. We had not worked together before, all these caregivers. That's a lot of human beings, a lot of personalities, a lot of opinions. And so that didn't surprise me, but it was probably one of the most challenging parts of the 2 weeks. And then his parents, when I first talked to the nurse practitioner in the hospice that he was in, he told me his parents were no longer allowed to visit the center because they were so, I think she used the word toxic, but they were so at odds with each other, and they caused a lot of drama and friction. And so when that scene where I'm holding his hand and his parents' hand, they're divorced, they were separated, it was really a moment of shock that they were able to be in the same space, and that wasn't meant to be. The father was arriving, and the mother was supposed to leave, and it happened to coincide that he showed up and she showed up, and she was freaking out, and so it was just more the dynamic of the interpersonal dynamics and the healing that happened in that space. That was so beautiful and powerful to witness. That couldn't happen in a medical environment. For various reasons. So those were some of the highlights of the surprising things.
Thank you. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to say your name correctly. It's Kiai. Oh, did you just leave? Oh, I think she put her hand down. Amber, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
That was absolutely beautiful. I cried like the whole entire time. I recently became certified death doula. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, but I don't have any medical background. I'm a hairstylist. However, I have been with two of my grandmothers as they transitioned, and am feeling very drawn to this work. And I put in the chat that Aditi, I would love to come visit. Is there an opportunity to come view your establishment and shadow you, I guess, or like any advice on my journey on what I'm doing?
Yeah, thank you, Amber. I love that you're a hairstylist, and because death isn't a medical event, and that's part of this unfolding and remembrance that we're all experiencing. So I honor you. And have you connected with other doulas in your community? Have you made those connections yet?
No, not in my community per se. I was thinking about my daughters for when she goes to kindergarten, possibly starting to volunteer at hospice or something like that. I already go. I visit one of my clients' fathers who's got dementia, and I've been asked to maybe go visit with another elderly, one of my clients' mothers. And my passion kind of came too because when my father died suddenly, and nothing was in order, and I was like left to kind of figure all that out. So I also want to be there for the end of life, but I want to help people figure out what to do and how to live and how to, like, that's Ethan's message. And oh my God, it's so beautiful. Like, we need to learn how to live and help people grieve and not worry about what the finances were, like that's part of what I'm passionate about. But no, I really haven't done anything besides be with my family when they're passing. But yeah.
Yeah, I think really finding networks to collaborate with, I think, is a really supportive way to continue this work. We are part of a network called the Omega Home Network. And during the AIDS crisis in the 80s, these homes popped up mainly in New York, upstate New York, because those individuals didn't have a place to die. So people opened up their homes and rallied their communities to tend to those that were dying from AIDS. And so these homes are now part of the network called the Omega Home Network. So you could see if there's an Omega Home in your community if you go to omegahome.network.org. There's
Okay.
and we're yeah, and you're welcome to visit. We have an Airbnb, 3 Airbnb rooms that you could stay in and connect. Feel free to.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, and this film was absolutely beautiful.
Thanks, Amber. Okay. Can you tell us how to pronounce your name?
Kiai.
Yeah. Hi, Kiai.
Hi. I have a kind of logistic question. Aditi, I know you were still at your job at the hospice, and so I was wondering how much time were you spending in those last 2 weeks?
Thank you. Yeah, I took those 2 weeks off. I somehow, or 1 week off. And so I was there around the clock pretty much. Um, and then worked just from, remotely. I did what I could. It just somehow worked out. It wasn't sustainable, wouldn't be sustainable for future caregiving. But somehow it worked out. I knew it was important. And to be honest, um, when I left one day, there was some confusion about the meds, and he almost had a seizure, and I just sort of felt responsible. So I didn't want to. I wanted to keep oversight. So I was there more than I am now for the ones we're caring for.
If I can continue the question, actually, I have more questions. Just because my father was in hospice 2 years ago, and he was by himself most of the time, and so in the film you see people around Ethan all the time, and I just thought, like, oh my goodness, it's so beautiful that he had that community around him. And was it true that he just had somebody near him all the time?
Yeah, he did. And at some points he loved community, and he loved gathering. And so I think it kind of gave him a surge of energy when he first got to us. You see how he was perking up, and he was sort of the amusement. He liked to amuse us and laugh and joke. And at one point it became clear his body was starting to let go, and he was having this desire to be with us, and also needed to turn inward, and there was a push-pull. So we actually asked for more space and more quiet. And so that happened, and then he became unresponsive, and then we invited people back in. So we're just sort of reading reading him and feeling into what he needed at the moment. But yes, it's a lot of energy, a lot of people.
Thank you.
Morgan and Woody.
Hi, thank you so much, everyone who is involved in creating this and sharing this with us. I have a question for Scott. I'm a big fan of all of your films, and they all touch on just the most raw human experiences and vulnerable times. I wondered if there were some connections. One of my favorite is your birth film, and I was seeing like some parallels and whatnot. I wondered, like, for you, what big were there big connections between like your training that you did as a doula and learning that, and then facing the death of it, or differences? I don't want to pigeonhole there. So big similarities or differences, and thoughts on getting to cover those two parts of life.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. These are threshold spaces, and training to be a birth doula, you learn how to be present and to recognize that the woman in labor, her energetic field is paramount. Similarly, in the space of someone who's dying, the dying person and their energetic field is paramount. And so it's kind of just learning how to be at the pace of the person who's dying, being at the bedside, as I'm mentioning, and listening to what that person needs. Aditi spoke to that. Like, yes, there was someone with Ethan at all points in time, but she was kind of like this, gentle conductor of that energy of the space. And were constantly checking in on what Ethan needed. And so there was a great parallel. I didn't imagine how gentle this one would be, Obviously, with the birth film, you're in go mode as soon as you hear the woman's having her first contractions. Here, I showed up, and it was just recognizing that the people who are caring for someone who's dying, especially these strangers, like there are all these forms of love that show up out of nowhere. Like there's the poetry of it is very unexpected. And so you really need to listen and pay attention. And that's what, the traditional medicine elder in this film, Greg Lathrop, he says all the time, the key to being a positive presence there is to pay attention, pay attention, pay attention.
Trisha. Oops, you're muted, Patricia. There you go.
Can you hear me now? Okay, my question is to Adita. In terms of Ethan, it seemed like he was supported in transitioning on his own without any like medicine to keep him comfortable, but not to assist with his dying. And I'm curious what your perspective is of having medical assisted dying versus how Ethan transitioned.
Yeah, I am a supporter of medical aid in dying for, as a choice. And in some cases, well, I think in Ethan's case, there was so much he gifted us in those 2 weeks of his death that he may not have had the opportunity to gift us with had he chosen to ingest medicines. And I think the way he lived his life as you see, a yogi, meditator, belly dancer in India, plant medicine, um, well, deeply connected to plant medicine, I'd say. I think his way of dying, this was a much more natural way of dying that was in alignment with how he lived his life. So I don't know if he would have ingested the medicines. You have to be able to ingest them, as you may know, to take it. And I don't know if he would have chosen that, because when I met him so when he was in the inpatient hospice in Charlotte, as I mentioned, they didn't want to transport him initially. They said he's too fragile. He may die en route. So the fact that he lived 2 weeks after coming here was just pretty remarkable. And he had so much. I think he felt so complete in his dying days. Had he taken the medicine in an inpatient facility and not had that ceremony and ritual and community, I think he wouldn't have died with as much fulfillment and ease, because it was a pretty tragic thing to die that early for him. So, yeah, and some people look at this film and they say, my gosh, like 14 days, that seems awful without food and water. And that was not by choice. He couldn't take a drop of water without coughing and aspirating. So yeah, I can understand both points of view. We know that people who are prescribed the medicines don't all take them. So majority of people actually just like the feeling of control, knowing that they have a way out if they wanted to. So yeah, I think it's an important choice for people to have.
Well, I also want to thank you, Scott, for just doing such a beautiful job being able to capture something that so many of us, like myself and other people, are afraid of. So that is just, I just think it really was beautifully done and very sensitive. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Oh, there. Hi. Thanks. This is a question for Aditi. Well, for either of you, really, but I'm curious, I guess for Aditi, because you've been present for many people dying and transitioning. I'm curious if you have any advice for people when they're dying. Any words of wisdom or insights that maybe can help people that are in that place?
Thank you for the question. For people who are actually facing their own mortality in the dying process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So go ahead.
no, go ahead. Sorry.
I think one of the things I remind people of when they're in the active dying period and in their active dying process is I remind them that their body knows how to do this. We are designed to leave these bodies. And so easing into the process and I think I mentioned it, or in the film I mentioned just sort of being in the moment and being with what's happening does seem to ease the process. It's the resistance to it. I've seen, you can have a lot of delirium and agitation, and some of that is physiologic, and some of it I do think is energetic and spiritual. So I think just being present with what is, and some of this requires some preparation ahead of time. You can see big shifts in the dying process, miracles or and moments of realization and epiphany. But generally, if people have prepared for death throughout their lives, then this process is just a natural part, a natural process that they're familiar with, at least the process of letting go and surrendering. So in the moment, I often say, your body knows what to do. All you have to do is relax into this process and experience. Easier said than done for some, but it does seem to help. I see a shift when I mention that, especially if women have had, if I'm speaking to a mother, I often mention childbirth. Remember how your body did that, and just bring them back to the innate wisdom of the body. Yeah.
Belinda.
Oh, hey. I wanted to first say, Scott, thank you for capturing such an absolutely stunning moment in Ethan's history. Thank you for that. I've had the opportunity to be with my dad, and then when he passed, our mom surrounded by family, and then I had an amazing opportunity to walk my best friend's husband through the entire day, and had no idea I was going to be doing that. And so thank you, and it was just brought back some beautiful memories for me. I wanted to ask about your aftercare. So my role and what I do is I always say I come when the casseroles stop coming is when I show up. That's usually when I get called. And so I just want to kind of know, how do you guys follow up, or how do you guys care for them after the casseroles stop coming?
In our community, you mean? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, your program. First off, thank you for reminding me that we have choices. I'll probably go ahead and put my reservation in for whenever it's my turn. But yeah, so your community and what it is that your program, how do you guys do follow-up care? Because sadly I know that many hospices are 13 months. Have fun, see you later. Sorry, I don't mean to sound so biased, but I just want to know what you guys do for aftercare.
It's true, with the privatization of hospice, the bereavement care, the requirement is just 13 months of follow-up, and it could be one phone call, and that counts, And so I watched our grief offerings or after death support diminish in our program before I left. And so it's a conversation we are still having. We're still an emerging organization, but we definitely want to incorporate more grief ritual and opportunities for people to engage with us. We do rituals of remembrance for the families we've tended to, and that's been really powerful. We have grief tenders that are connecting with those who have died, or their children or their family members. Sorry, not the people who've died, but that too. There's definitely some of that happening. So yeah, I think it's an important piece, and you can't leave the grief conversation out of the death and dying conversation. So thank you for the question.
So this is a question for either or both of you. It seems like we did a pretty thorough and competent job in the 20th century of sequestering death to the absolute shadows of culture and society, and suddenly it seems like it's banging down the doors, asking to be heard and seen again. And there's definitely something that we're definitely having a moment right now. And I'm curious what you all think, why you all think that is, and how you view what's happening right now with the reemergence of death coming out of the shadows and back into the light.
You want to speak, Scott?
Well, what I've discovered in the most roundabout way, and I've written about this, is for me, the revelation is that the practice of building community is simple if it starts with the dying. If we put the dying and caring for the dying as a thought, first as a thought exercise, actually what we're seeing with Aditi's organization, the Center for Conscious Living and Dying, is that there's just been this tremendous groundswell of excitement, building the conscious living piece through caring for the dying. And so that having this zeitgeist moment around community death care, That's why there's been this like 7x or 10x increase in people training to be death doulas, because we want to gently, we want to move through the taboo that death should be othered and put off to the side. And that's the experience we're having around, this movement that Aditi is really one of the people at the forefront of. So it's pretty remarkable, and it's unexpected, and you still often hear that voice that says death is taboo, death is taboo. And what we're finding is that like death is actually lovely and enjoyable to work, not obviously, maybe not dying, but to be in this community. It's very fulfilling.
And that also speaks to the need that we have, which has been so absent in our culture, to practice ritual and to come together and do something sacred together. All these pieces fit together. Aditi, do you want to add to anything there?
I would say that the institutions that popped up in the last century, I think, to care for those who are aging and dying are just unacceptable to the generation that's aging now. So the baby boomers are just, they're demanding something different. I don't know anybody that wants to go into a nursing home. And I think, so that's part of it. I think the need and desire for something different from what people have seen their loved ones go through. The overly medicalized deaths, the institutionalized deaths are just not acceptable. And then I think COVID did have something to do with it, is my sense. Because I do agree, I think this yearning for community and belonging and meaning making is just so prevalent right now, at least in our communities. That's what we're seeing. And then there's also this, when I was doing a talk for the Love, Serve, Remember Foundation. I don't know if you all know Ram Dass, but he was quite a thought leader in psychedelics and death back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe until recently, until he died. But the organizer said, the two topics that people all over the world are most interested in right now are in psychedelics and death. And I don't think that's coincidence either. I think there's something about the consciousness and the being present in those moments when the veil is so thin. It's always thin, but you're much more aware of it when you're next to a dying person. I think there's that yearning for that level of intimacy and connection too. That's a somatic felt experience. So I think it's a good question. Wonderful question.
Aditi, what are some of the challenges you're facing?
Truthfully, growing too fast. That's a big one right now. So much interest in a short time, and we're still grounding as we're expanding. And so that's one. Revenue generating, like how do we create new models and sustain them when we're not charging Medicare, Medicaid, and we're not charging for our services at this point. So that the income piece, the financial piece is a not a concern, but something we have to really look at. And I think those are the two main ones, and being in community. What does that really mean? When we're talking about community supported end of life care, we aren't familiar with community in the real sense of the word, deep vulnerability with one another, like allowing our shadows to be present. What do we do with that? So we're learning a lot about being in an intentional community, which if I had known that, I might have run the other way because of my association with them. But it's been really powerful. I've grown a ton in ways that I couldn't if I were just isolated and doing my thing.
Right. Well, we'll put, I think Beth put it in there, in the chat, there's a place where you can follow Aditi's work and also donate. And before we get to the last two questions, Scott, I have a similar question for you. You've made this beautiful film, and I'm curious what kind of obstacles or challenges you're facing in getting it out there.
It's hard to sell a death film to mainstream media, and it's an exciting challenge because Ethan willed this project into being. How can we love the underdog quality of being like, yeah, we've got this death film and we're trying to get it out in the world, and we're doing it in very unconventional ways, by holding space for one community screening at a time, and obviously, you need a few breaks to go your way. And for us, we're feeling like with the grassroots momentum is picking up, and it's just, right now kind of getting to collaborate with these impact partners and organizations. I mean, it's honestly, the challenge is just getting the word out and getting people to spread the word on social media, and getting people to do the E3 mantra. I'm just going to hold this up. This is our sticker. So maybe at the end of this call or this discussion, we can all do that together. So we feel if we get the whole world to do the E3 mantra, just like the Ice Bucket Challenge, the movie will get out there. So we'll see.
Thanks, Scott. Okay.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, about getting the film out. I agree that it's an important message. My mother happens to be in stroke rehab right now, and we are struggling with, or I'm struggling with, allowing my mother to live in her house again and not need to have somebody here all the time. For I'm in her house now, actually getting it ready for her to come home. But I'm just wondering if there's a way, there's got to be some other way to kind of trickle it into mainstream somehow. And so I actually wondering if, so the film is coming out April 2nd on some sort of, where is it?
Exactly.
Where can people see it, basically?
Sure. And just to mention, so Beth, if you look in your text chat there, Beth posted links to all of our social media, to a write-up of our impact campaign, to the work we're doing with Aditi's nonprofit, the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. So all the information is there. So if there's one thing you want to do in the chat, it might be like copy and paste some of those links, because then you'll get all the updates. But generally speaking, we're working with CCLD and other impact partners to do 100 facilitated screenings in April on this new platform called Kinema. And we'd love for you all to be screening facilitators as well. So we're saying to people, if you have friends, family, colleagues, and community you want to share the film with, just visit our website, the last Ecstatic Days movie.com/screenings, and you can sign up to do a virtual facilitated screening in April or May, or an in-person screening after May. So that's the best way to help us get the word out, I would say. Yeah.
Thanks, Scott. Sarah, we're just about to wrap up. Yeah, you want to ask the last question? Oh no, there's a couple minutes if you want, Sarah.
Oh, there is? Okay. Oh, am I? Yeah. Well, now I have two questions. One is, if we do a screening, do you show up so we can ask questions? If it's virtual?
We're trying to encourage folks to do screenings on their own for their community. So it's kind of like you experience this, and then if you feel called to share this with your community, we'd love for you to do it. So in all likelihood, maybe no, but our spirit will be there. Ethan will be there. You got this.
Okay, I figured it was a long shot. My other question is, related to, so I've had some experience being with people when they've passed, and they're often, and this is probably a bigger thing than dropping at the very end of this conversation, but there are often stories about like the light, seeing the light, or I'm curious if there are common things that you notice as people are passing, like a perspective or an insight that you've witnessed.
Yeah, I think what we know about near-death experiences comes from people who have had near-death experiences. So, sorry, death experiences comes from people who've had near-death experiences and shared death experiences. And so there's a lot of research about that and information out there. And there are consistent messages: light, expansive energy, oneness, consciousness, peace, support from others who've gone before them. And my experience is at that moment of the last breath, there's often a sense of just a beautiful stillness and quiet. and deep peace by the time you get to that moment. So whether it's tumultuous till that moment, that those final breaths often are peaceful.